Hello, good evening, and welcome to tonight's edition of Resistance TV. In this evening's programme, I'm going to be speaking to Tony Greenstein about his new book entitled Zionism During the Holocaust. Tony is the son of a rabbi who fought Oswald Mosley's fascists in the 1930s. He's a veteran anti-Zionist activist and a founding member of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. He also helped to establish Jews for boycotting Israeli goods. Tony is a long-standing anti-fascist campaigner and the author of A History of Fighting Fascism in Brighton and the South Coast. And he has the dubious distinction of being the first Jewish member during Jeremy Corbyn's leadership of the Labour Party to be expelled for bringing the party into disrepute after being absurdly accused of anti-Semitism. Tony, your book's an extraordinary tale. I mean, first of all, let me ask you what motivated you to write it?
I think the main thing that prompted me to write it was the way that the Holocaust itself has been weaponized in the service of the Israeli state and what it's doing. I mean, for example, when Abba Eban, the Israeli foreign minister, who was a member of the Israeli Labour government, don't forget, when people were proposing withdrawing to the Green Line, which is where Israel was before 1967, he referred to the borders as Auschwitz borders. And there's been very similar comments in relation to the Holocaust. When Israel was surrounding Beirut, where Yasser Arafat was holed out back in 1982, Menachem Begin referred to Arafat as Hitler in his bunker. So, I mean, you have a continual use. I mean, as Edith Zertel said, there hasn't been a war fought by Israel that hasn't been in the name of the Holocaust. And that is the problem. The Holocaust has been used to justify many of the pogroms and attacks on the Palestinians, which are, of course, reminiscent of what happened to the Jews. So I thought I should write a book explaining what the Zionist role was during the Holocaust, which is very different from what they appear now.
I mean, we've not had a chance to read the book yet, Tony, because I think you've only just taken delivery of them. But you've given me some sort of nuggets, some extracts, and I mean, it's astonishing, frankly, you know, to realise the extent of the Zionist sort of role in kind of working, effectively, with the Nazis. But I just wonder, in your opinion, how has the Zionist lobby been able to keep it secret, essentially, from so many people for so long?
Well, it hasn't been secret. I mean, if you wanted the information, you could find it, but you'd have to go to journals, you'd have to go to papers, etc. Like many things, it wasn't the right narrative because Israel is the favoured son of the Western imperial powers. So they have adopted a narrative of the Holocaust, which sees Israel as the natural successor to those who died. I mean, people don't realise, for example, that when many rescue schemes were proposed in the 1940s or 30s for German Jews, the Zionist movement was opposed. The Zionist leaders were bitterly opposed. And they were opposed on the grounds, in essence, that if Jews could be rescued in countries other than Palestine, what was the point of having a Jewish state? That was their logic. I mean, I can give you examples. I'm sure know, in 1938, November, there was a massive pogrom against the Jews called Kristallnacht. It was the first major pogrom. The Night of the Broken Glass, it's called, because of the number of windows that were shattered, as well as synagogues burnt. And after that, Britain, the government, agreed that 10,000 German Jewish children would come to Britain in what was known as the Kindertransport. So you might ask, what was the attitude of the Zionists? You'd think they'd be overjoyed that here were 10,000 children, Jewish children, who were being rescued from what may be fatal consequences. Not a bit of it. David Ben-Gurion, who was then the chair of the Jewish Agency, which was the government in waiting in Palestine and the first prime minister of Israel, said in a speech to the Mapai, that's the Israeli Labour Party's Central Committee, on the 9th of December 1938, that is a month after Kristallnacht, if I knew that it would be possible to save all the children in Germany by bringing them over to England, and only half of them by transporting them to Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, then I would opt for the second alternative. We must weigh not only the life of these children, but also the history of the people of Israel. So, I mean, that was their position, and it was their position throughout the Holocaust. So there were many rescue schemes, Santo Domingo, Freeland in Australia, Darwin, Alaska. The leader of the American Zionists, Stephen Weiss, was opposed to it because he said it was too cold, because Alaska didn't have immigration controls like the rest of America. So they went to a place which was a lot hotter as a result of that. Throughout the war, the Zionist movement and the leadership opposed schemes to rescue Jews, which would have saved them. And Ben-Gurion explained, it was in just a week later in a memorandum to the Zionist executive on the 17th of December 1938, he explained the problems. If the Jews are faced with a choice between the refugee problem and rescuing Jews from concentration camps on the one hand, and aid for the National Museum in Palestine on the other, the Jewish sense of pity will prevail, and our people's entire strength will be directed to aid for refugees in the various countries. And this was his fear. Zionism will vanish from the agenda. And indeed, not only world public opinion in England and America, but also from Jewish public opinion. And he laid it out. We're risking Zionism's very existence if we allow the refugee problem to be separated from the Palestine problem. So that was their solution. When people talked about rescuing refugees, they always said, what about Palestine? But of course, the British had imposed immigration barriers because the Palestinians had demanded that they didn't want any more settlers. So that therefore meant when they opposed rescues to elsewhere, they were in essence consigning them to the gas chambers. And there is no doubt that the Zionist movement bears responsibility for maybe 200,000 or 300,000 Jews who might otherwise have survived.
Yeah. I mean, Tony, obviously you've got your book now. I can see the piles of books that you've had delivered behind you there. I mean, tell us about any difficulties you had in actually finding a publisher for it.
Oh, well, I wrote to a number of Z Books. I got back saying the topic was incendiary. Pluto did not reply, but they were basically not interested. The most promising was Verso, but in the end, they also got cold feet. So I was forced, faced with the problem of having to self-publish. Now, fortunately, self-publishing today is quite different from the past, and it is quite easy. And in order to pay the requisite amount of money, I fundraised. I set up a crowdfunder, and knowing that the Zionists would have it taken down, I set it up at the weekend when we were all in synagogue praying on the Saturday. And of course, on the Sunday, the day of rest, they wouldn't be there. But so I assumed that by Monday it would be taken down. In fact, it was Tuesday.
It was taken down then, was it? Yeah.
It was taken down 3 days later. But by then, I'd written, emailed, or sent the message to every single donor. There were already about £700-800 in it, saying, look, this is going to get taken down. I have no doubt about it at all. Please send me your email, because I will then launch my own crowdfunder, which is, of course, what I did. I put it on my blog. The Zionists are trying to shut it up, and people contributed very generously. So they helped fund the book's publication.
Well, that's really encouraging to see that level of solidarity. I mean, you said there, Tony, that I think you said it was Verso said, or was it Verso who said it was incendiary?
No, Z Books.
Oh, beg your pardon, Z Books.
Yeah.
Now then, why should, in your opinion, factual history of real events be incendiary?
It's a good question. I don't know. Because, of course, if you raise it, then you get accused of anti-Semitism. The Zionist response to all of this is, well, you're accusing the Jews of killing themselves. But of course you're not. The Zionists were in Germany 2% of the German Jewish population. In Poland, they've been smashed at the last 3 elections in 1938. In Warsaw, out of the 20 Jewish council seats, the Zionists got 1. The Bund got 17, the anti-Zionist Jewish Bund. So the Zionists were a tiny minority of the Jewish population of Eastern Europe and Germany. But today, of course, it's a different matter. And people rewrite history backwards, if you like.
So no, indeed. I think it was something that you wrote, Tony, or somewhere I read that, and you've kind of alluded to it there, really. But at that sort of time, and for a long time, actually, as I understand it, I mean, most Jewish people saw Zionism as a form of Jewish anti-Semitism. I mean, is that a fair comment?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the anti-Semites wanted the Jews to leave, and the Zionists. I mean, the Zionism was a unique reaction amongst Jews. Which said, yes, you're basically right. The problem with the Jews is they're homeless. They are guests who've outstayed their welcome in other people's hotels. And so there was a congruence, if you like, between the Zionists and the anti-Semites. I mean, I'll give you an example. It's in his diaries, Theodor Herzl. He was the founder of political Zionism. He said he traveled around Europe meeting different royal personages and others like the Pope, the Sultan, the Ottoman Sultan, the Kaiser of Germany he met in Palestine. He met King Victor in Hungary and so on. And one of the people he met was the uncle of the Kaiser, the Grand Duke of Baden. And he said, I hope you support us. And he said, yes, of course, I support you. I've only got one problem, which is if I support Zionism, people will accuse me of anti-Semitism. And that was it. Jews throughout Europe, I mean, the first Zionist Congress was held in Basel in Switzerland in 1897. It was supposed to be held in Munich, but the Munich Jewish community rose up and said, this is an anti-Semitic gathering. We don't want any part of it. Please don't hold it here. So yes.
What a curious irony then, Tony, that we're in this, I mean, the world has been turned on its head now with the IHRA working definition, which, you know, essentially is a charter of Zionism, isn't it, really? I mean,
yes, I mean, the IHRA was drawn up not to combat anti-Semitism, but to combat anti-Zionism and to label it and target and smear it as anti-Semitism. Why else would 7 of the illustrations deal with Israel? I mean, it says that, you know, if you question the existence of a Jewish state or the Israeli state, that is anti-Semitic. Why? Jews aren't a nation. Why should they be entitled to a state? It says if you describe Israel as a racist endeavor. Well, it is a racist endeavor. I mean, in every single way.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean,
you know, settler colonial. I mean, you know, all these. I mean, settler colonial entities. I mean, from the United States of America in its early days, Australia. You know, of course they're racist.
Every aspect of it is. Every aspect of Israel is racist. There can hardly be any disagreement. I mean, 93% of Israeli land is for Jews only. There are hundreds of Jewish-only communities. In every aspect, welfare benefits, student grants, you name it. Arabs or Palestinians inside Israel even are discriminated against, let alone and when you come to the West Bank, well, you have 2 legal systems on one territory, one for Jews and one for Palestinians. How can that not be an apartheid situation?
Absolutely. Well, absolutely. But, you know, Tony, I mean, you said that Z Book said it was incendiary. All these other publishers wouldn't touch it. Do you think that's why? I mean, I know you said as well, but of course, it was a secret, and yet most people are completely unaware of this. I mean, this will be an absolute revelation for people, I think, hearing you tonight and those that get the chance to read your book. I mean, do you think that's why nobody else has written a sort of account that you've done now? I mean, you know, all these years later, it's come down to Tony Greenstein to write this. I mean, why is that?
Well, it's a good question. The last book which dealt with Zionist-Nazi collaboration was in 1983 by Lenny Brenner, Zionism in the Age of the Dictators, which is a good book. I don't agree with all of it. It's analysis, but it's a good book. I mean, Professor Francis Nicosia, who's the Raoul Hilberg Professor of Holocaust Studies at Vermont University, he's written 2 books very similar. Third Reich and the Palestine question, Zionism and anti-Semitism in Nazi Germany. He, I would say, is pro-Zionist, but he provides much of the evidence for what happened. And I don't think really anyone can disagree with it. I think many of his conclusions are at variance with the evidence he produced. But, for instance, Ken Livingstone got into hot water, didn't he? Because he said that that the Nazis had supported Zionism. But again, the evidence is extremely clear. I'll give you an example. On the 28th of January, 1935, Reinhard Heydrich, who was described by Gerald Rettlinger in his book, The Final Solution, as the engineer of the final solution, issued a directive stating the activity of the Zionist-oriented youth organizations that are engaged in the occupational restructuring of the Jews lies in the interest of the National Socialist state leadership. They are not to be treated with that strictness that is necessary to apply to the members of the so-called German Jewish organizations, brackets, assimilationists. And then in May 35, Schwarz-Korr, which was the paper of the SS, wrote that the Zionists adhere to a strict racial position. By emigrating to Palestine, they're helping to build their own Jewish state. The assimilation-minded Jews deny their race and insist on their loyalty to Germany, or claim to be Christians, which is worse because they've been baptized in order to subvert National Socialist principles. So, it was absolutely clear. And that was, I sourced that from Lucy DeWidowitz, who's was a right-wing Zionist in her book, War Against the Jews. And for anyone who wants to refer to it, it's page 118. So, it's quite clear. The anti-Zionist, non-Zionist youth organizations were banned in 1936. The Zionist ones were banned in 1939. Of course, at the end of the day, Zionist Jews went into the gas chambers too. But I think also one must make a great distinction between ordinary Zionists then, most of whom supported the boycott of Germany, and the Zionist leadership, which is a very different kettle of fish. And I don't think we should confuse that. But
we'll say a little bit more actually about the economic boycott of Germany that was trying to be organised by the World Jewry, as I understand it. That I believe the Zionists in Germany were not happy about that. Just say a little bit about that if you can.
Yes, when Hitler came to power in January 1933. The immediate reaction of Jews, most Jews, including Zionist Jews or rank and file Zionists, was of course to boycott, not to buy anything German. It was a natural reaction. It took off spontaneously like wildfire. And on March, I think it was the 25th, when the boycott movement was going to hold a rally, a monster rally in the United States, Göring summoned 3 leaders of the Jewish community. He didn't even invite the Zionists because there was such a tiny minority. And it was only at the end, the last minute, they secured an invitation. And he told them basically to go to the West and try and get this called off. The Nazis were extremely worried about the boycott because they depended on exports for their financial and economic situation.
And how did the Zionists react to that request then by Göring?
Well, the Zionists were very favourable. They agreed, they volunteered to go because from the start, the Zionists had attacked the boycott as un-Zionist. They said, we want to work with them. I can quote again, if you want. It's a letter that was sent on the 21st of June, 1933 by the Zionist Federation of Germany. Okay, I'll put that on. Just let me 1 minute, sorry.
Okay, no worries. Tony's got some house guests he's having to sort out at the moment, so just bear with us a moment. He'll be back with us in a second.
Yeah, is that on there? How's that? There you are. I'm doing my best, Daniel. I'm doing my best, but I think that's going to be the best. Well, on the 21st of June, the Zionist Federation, sorry for that, sent a memo to Hitler. And it said basically, I mean, I can go through it. Zionism has no illusions about the difficulty of the Jewish condition, which consists of an abnormal occupational pattern and so on. Our acknowledgement of Jewish nationality provides for a clear and sincere relationship to the German people and its national and racial realities, precisely because we don't wish to falsify these fundamentals, because we too are against mixed marriages and for maintaining the purity of the Jewish group. The realization of Zionism could only be hurt by resentment of Jews abroad against the German development. Boycott propaganda is in essence fundamentally un-Zionist, because Zionism wants not to do battle, but to convince and to build. And this was sent on the 21st of June to Hitler. So make of that what you want. It was never answered, but it was found after the war.
Yeah.
I mean, that was their attitude. I mean, they never once at the Zionist Congress has condemned the Hitler regime. You'd think that's amazing, but that's so. When you listen to them today, you should ask yourself why that was.
And yet, I mean, you mentioned Ken there, Ken Livingston. Of course, he cited the Havara transfer agreement in an interview after he was asked about Hitler, I believe. I think he was actually he was doing a tour of the TV and radio studios at the time, I think, in support of Nash Shah, who was an MP in Bradford, who'd been suspended on spurious grounds of anti-Semitism, and Ken was doing the rounds, basically supporting her. And I think he got asked about Hitler, and he cited the Havara transfer agreement, and then got doorstepped, as you'll be well aware, Tony, by John Mann, accusing him of being a Nazi apologist. Now, just tell us about this Havara agreement and the Zionist role in the Havara agreement. What was the Havara transfer agreement? What was the Zionist role in it?
Well,
and was Ken accurate in his description?
Ken was accurate. He made one or two small mistakes, like calling Palestine Israel, which hadn't come about. And he got Hitler's accession wrong. I think he said 1932 rather than 1933. But in essence, of course, he was right. It started off as a private initiative, and it was taken over by the Zionist movement. And what it involved, basically, was that the Reichsmarks of the German Jews were put into a frozen bank account. They couldn't be taken out of the country. But what happened was they were used to purchase German machinery, which was then exported to Palestine. So there was no loss of hard currency, except for the £1,000 that Jews could take out of the country in hard currency in order to gain entrance to Palestine. But only a small minority of Jews ever took advantage of it, because it applied mainly to the rich Jews. £1,000.
It wasn't available to working class Jews, and many of whom were communists and socialists, as I understand it.
Well, some. I mean, it was a mainly middle class community which got poorer, but £1,000 then is worth about £85,000 now.
Yes, of course. Yeah,
so I mean, if you had that in spare cash plus enough to order machinery and so on, you were pretty comfortably off. So and that kind of person would have been able to find refuge somewhere else. I mean, there were many countries would accept someone with that kind of wealth. So Havara really didn't save anyone. What it did was block the exit of many more. And the Zionists, I mean, they lobbied the Gestapo not to allow Jews to use it to go to any other place. And in practice, it actually prejudiced the position of Jews in Germany. It never helped them. And it was certainly not aimed at helping Jews, because the Zionists didn't want most German Jews. They were the wrong sort of Jew. They wanted young, healthy, obviously Zionists, young pioneers. They didn't want refugees. This was not what Zionism was about. It was not a refugee movement. Of course, they pretend today that it's different, but then it was very much the case. So, I mean,
and, what I find fascinating as well, Tony, is people like Benjamin Netanyahu sort of essentially rewriting history and blaming the Mufti in Palestine for what the Nazis eventually did to the Jews. I mean, Say a bit about that if you can as well.
Oh, at the Zionist Congress in 2015, not Hitler, Netanyahu, made a speech which basically said that as a result of the meeting between the Mufti and Hitler, which was in November 1941, as far as I remember, it was about around that time, that Hitler wanted to expel the Jews, and it's true the Nazis wanted to expel the Jews while they could, and he was persuaded by the Mufti to burn them instead. And so the Holocaust really is because of the Palestinians, which is
the Palestinians, yeah.
To be fair, I mean, I don't know of any legitimate Zionist historian who accepts this loads of nonsense, because the historical evidence is quite clear. Firstly, the transcript is available of the meeting and it says nothing of the kind. Secondly, the Holocaust started in June 1941 with Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of Russia, when the Einsatzgruppen and followed in the wake of the German army and started mopping up Jews in White Russia, Ukraine, and so on. It's clearly not true. Chelmno had begun an operation, the first extermination camp, I think a couple of weeks later. Belzec had already, the plans had already gone into operation. These were two of the Reinhard Heydrich plan. They were called Reinhard Heydrich extermination camps. So, and Auschwitz was functioning anyway, although it wasn't yet exterminating Jews. So everything historically is wrong about it. The evidence for this that they produce is from Dieter Wisliceny, who was Eichmann's man in Slovakia. Slovakia was where the first deportations of Jews to the extermination camps took place. And he gave evidence at the Nuremberg trials that Eichmann and the Mufti had met with each other and plotted and planned. But this was clearly to save his own neck. I mean, he was hanged by the Czechoslovakians when he was handed over to them by the Americans. And he clearly wanted, if you like, to be useful to the Zionists, because they were going around, Rudolf Kastner, who was the leader of the Hungarian Zionists, were going around Nuremberg exonerating different Nazis, not only Kurt Becher, who people may have heard of, but Hermann Krumi, who was the second in charge to Eichmann and personally carried out the Hungarian Holocaust, which killed over 400,000 Jews. So it rests on very shaky foundations, not least because when Eichmann was interviewed by the Israeli police in Israel and asked about the Mufti, he said he'd never met him. So, I mean, there really is no evidence, apart from a confession made by Wisliceny to save his own neck.
How difficult was it, Tony, writing this book? I mean, I know you said a lot of the information is available. I mean, are you revealing things in the book which for the first time and so on? I mean, one of the things I think would be really be interesting is the background to the Zionist movement actually, as you say, lobbying the Gestapo. I mean, actually, it's mind blowing. When you hear these.
Well, yes. I mean, in my chapter in my book, I mean, if I can find it here, I have a small section on the Holocaust and Zionism. In fact, it's a chapter on the Holocaust and Zionism. And it says, if I can find it, I probably can't now.
Yeah, I know the problem, Tony, when you're trying to find something. It's always.
I know.
Just summarise it, Tony, if you can't find it. I mean,
I will. I wanted to, if I could quote from it directly. No, I can't find it now, but basically they lobbied the Nazis to only allow Jews to go to Palestine, and since they couldn't, it was virtually barred. It meant they were actually campaigning for them to go nowhere. And that was repeatedly. I mean,
and that was a death sentence then for many Jews.
Yeah. I mean, they had. I mean, their attitude to Evian was no different either.
Just say a bit more about that, Tony.
Yes. I mean, if I can just find this again. Yes, it was a meeting. In fact, I was wondering if we could share. I could possibly bring it up on so people could actually see it for themselves. It's an article, but
well, if you could, I mean, I'm not in control of the of that. I don't know if Gaz.
Oh, right. Yes.
Can you make that possible, Gaz, to allow Tony to share screen?
Okay. Well, I can put it here.
You put it there and then just talk to it, Tony.
Yes, I mean, let me read the quotation now. It's from a book, The Jewish State or the Israeli State by Boaz Evron. He was a journalist for Yediot Achronot, which is the widest circulation paper in Israel. And he quotes from a letter by George Landor, who was in charge of the resettlement of German Jews, to Stephen Weiss, who was the leader of American Zionism. And it's dated February the 13th, 1938. The Evian Conference was called by Roosevelt because to try and solve the Jewish refugee problem. It was called on the basis that no state would have to change their policy. It was really a face-saving exercise. But the Zionists weren't aware of this. And Landor wrote, quote, "I'm writing this letter at the request of Dr. Weizmann, who was the president of the Zionist organization, the first president of Israel, because we are extremely concerned lest the problem, that was the problem of Jewish refugees, be presented in a way which could prejudice the activity for Eretz Israel, that's the land of Israel. Even if the conference does not propose immediately after its opening other countries, but Eretz Israel as venues for Jewish emigration, it will certainly arouse a public response that could put the importance of Eretz Israel in the shade." And then there's an ellipse. "We are particularly worried that it would move Jewish organizations to collect large sums of money for aid to Jewish refugees. And these collections could interfere with our own collection efforts." That's page 178. And then he goes on. There is also a statement by Menachem Osishkin, who was a Russian member of the Zionist executive, in the meeting of the Jewish Agency executive on June the 26th, 1938. This was after the conference. He is highly concerned at the Evian conference. Now, Mr. Greenbaum, who's another member of the executive, is right in stating that there is a danger that the Jewish people also will take Eretz Israel off its agenda. And this should be viewed by us as a terrible danger. So it's not the danger to the Jewish people or the Jewish refugees that concerns it, but the danger to the Zionist movement. He hoped to hear in Evian that Eretz Israel remains the main venue for Jewish emigration. All other emigration countries do not interest him. The greatest danger is that attempts will be made. Listen to this. The greatest danger is that attempts will be made to find other territories for Jewish emigration. And the account sorry.
That's okay.
There's a danger the Jewish people will take Eretz Israel off its agenda, and this should be viewed by us as a terrible danger. He hoped to hear in Evian that Eretz Israel remains the main venue for Jewish emigration. All other emigration countries do not interest him. The greatest danger is that attempts will be made to find other territories for Jewish emigration. And the account of Ben-Gurion's statement at the same meeting, "No rationalizations can turn the conference from a harmful one to a useful one. What can and should be done is to limit the damage as far as possible." He doesn't know whether the Evian conference will open the gates of other countries to Jewish immigration. But like Greenbaum and Osishkin, he fears that at this time, the conference is liable to cause immense harm to Eretz Israel and Zionism. It was summed up in the meeting, the Zionist thing to do is to, quote, belittle the conference as far as possible and to cause it to decide nothing. So really, there you have it.
Yeah.
They were absolutely opposed to Evian and were determined to do it down if they could.
Yeah. Tony, I mean, I think you've been working on this book for some time now. I mean, in your research, I mean, did you discover anything that shocked you, or
Sorry?
when you were researching the book, did you come across any information that shocked you, or were you pretty kind of hardened to all of the?
No, nothing shocked me because I was quite well aware.
Yeah, yeah.
I was quite well aware.
I mean, how long have you been working on sort of researching and pulling all this together, Tony? Because I think you've been
over a period of a decade. I mean, I had
Right.
quite a long period of an illness, so that interfered with it. But it was over a decade.
Yeah.
But I mean, I read through hundreds of journal articles, books. I went into the archives of the Jewish Chronicle at some depth, so there is some new material and so on. So I mean, it pulls it all together in a way that it's comprehensible, and it hasn't been done before. But it's also not just about who did what, when, and how. It's also about it's a comprehensive deconstruction of Zionist historiography, because Zionism has rewritten the Holocaust according to its own narrative. So, for example, the Warsaw Ghetto, I mean, you would imagine today from the film and other things that the people who were the heroes in the Warsaw Ghetto were the Zionists. Whereas that wasn't the case. I mean, there were Zionist fighters, but the Zionist fighters who were there were instructed by their youth movements to leave the Warsaw Ghetto.
No, indeed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
hold on, sorry.
Yes, that's okay, Tony. Yeah. Just bear with us, viewers. Tony has obviously got some domestic arrangements he's having to contend with while he's speaking to us on the program. But what I'm going to do in a moment is I'll bring Sean in. Actually, I don't know if you can get Sean up on the screen and just sort of see what sort of reaction we're getting from our viewers. Are you there, Sean?
I'm here. Yes. Good evening, everyone. Great to be back. I have to say we've been off air for quite a while now. Yourself, me, and Lizzie. So hopefully we'll be back from tonight. So yeah, we've been having conversations about different books that we're all reading at the moment, and we've had one or two questions come in, which hopefully Tony will be able to answer for us when he comes back. One of the books I've been reading recently over my holiday that I've just been on is called Operation Paperclip, which is very, very interesting. I don't know if you're aware of that. That was an operation done by the secret intelligence just after the Second World War to round up all the Nazi scientists and take them over to America.
Yes, indeed.
So from what I've it is, and you know what I've gleaned from that is, so today this is the reason why we have big pharma, we have bioweapons, we have nuclear weapons, we have all these horrible things in the world that came from that era. So it's quite shocking to read all that and see how it's reflected on us today.
Tony, I don't know if we've got your attention again, Tony. Just because I brought Sean in now, and we're just going to get some audience reaction. But before I do that, how can people get hold of your book?
All right, the best way is to write to me.
Right, and how
Tony
do you do
Greenstein 104@gmail.com.
Tony Greenstein
104@gmail.com.
Okay.
Or they can send a check to PO Box 173, Brighton, BN51 9EZ.
Well, hopefully we can update the description of this discussion when it goes out afterwards, just as a kind of YouTube link for people to watch and give those details. How much is the book, Tony?
Oh, £12.50 for a paperback.
That's a steal.
And £80 for a hardback.
Well, that's a steal, mate. My book was £19, mate, for a paperback. But no,
I'm sorry about that.
No, mate, no, yours is a steal, mate. Yours is, it's a really good value for what will be a really fascinating and interesting read, I'm sure. But let me hand back over to Sean in the closing sort of 15 minutes or so, just sort of get kind of audience reaction and just get your thoughts on what people have said and any questions that they might have.
Yeah, people are absolutely fascinated, Tony, and of course they do want to buy your book. I was wondering if you've got any plans to do it on an audio book.
Yes, one will be coming out, or an ebook, I think. I'm not sure about an audio book. I don't really know the differences. I presume audio, you just listen to it. Is that right?
Yes, yeah, that's right. Yeah,
that's a lot of people are going. I just recorded mine. Actually, it's being edited as we speak, and
I'm not sure about that. To be quite honest, I wouldn't like to give a yes to that.
No, it's quite a long-winded process. But I think if you can, Tony, and you got the time, it's worth it because it just expands the audience, because a lot of people now are into Audible, audio books. They can listen to it while they're driving and things like that. So, it's something that might be worth considering. So what some authors do, I didn't feel it was appropriate to do this. But what some authors do is get someone else in to read it for them. But of course, there's a cost associated with that. But I think it's more authentic if you've got the inclination and the time to record it yourself. But anyway, something to sort of think about. Anyway, back to Sean.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions for you, Tony. The first one is from Prue, and she asks, any historical links between Zionism and Ukrainian Nazis? Now, I did point out to her that there is a Zionist sect called Chabad Lubavitch who have their headquarters in the Ukraine. But maybe you can expand on that. Any historical links between Zionism and Ukrainian Nazis?
Well, the main link was in 1921 when the founder of revisionist Zionism formed an agreement with Stravinsky, who was a representative of Petliura. Again, it's in the book. There's been a long history of collaboration, and I say the leader of the revisionist Zionists, who was then on the Zionist executive, undertook that. Petliura was responsible for the death of about 100,000 Jews in the pogroms, incidentally. We've seen today, not just today, but for the last 7-8 years, Israel's been arming, training, and so on, the Azov Battalion and other neo-Nazi militias, the Adair Battalion and so on, in Ukraine. So, there is this long history, but it's not just Ukraine. In Argentina, there was a neo-Nazi junta established in 1976. And for 7 years it ruled, and Israel armed, supplied, weaponized that junta, even though about 12.5% of its victims, it killed about 30 people, they died under torture mainly, were Jewish. It was a neo-Nazi. It had its own weird conspiracy theory, the Andinia plan of Marx, Freud and Einstein getting together and controlling the world. So, this neo-Nazi junta was the best of friends with Israel, and in fact, I'll just let my son in. Can I? Sorry.
Yeah. Okay, mate. Yeah. Any other comments that people have been putting out there? Sean?
Yeah, there's Lizzie was asking about how much control do you think the lobby have over our politics in this country? What's your view on that, Chris?
Oh, quite a bit, I think. That was pretty evident, wasn't it, during Jeremy Corbyn's leadership of the Labour Party, and he got very bad advice, in my opinion, from his team in the leader's office, who were constantly urging him to go and prostrate himself before the Board of Deputies of British Jews and the Jewish Leadership Council and so on. And that's okay, Tony. We're just picking up on another comment that was made about the influence of the Zionist lobby on British politics today, and I was just highlighting the influence that they wielded in relation to bringing down Jeremy Corbyn's leadership of the Labour Party, and it was very effective, and obviously the response, I think, was from the leadership was crass. To continue to try to appease the unappeasable, I think, was an absolutely disastrous strategy. I'm not saying confronting them would have necessarily prevailed, but it would have certainly, I think, had a far better chance of succeeding had they done that. I mean, by constantly backing down in the way that they did, just really fed the beast, as it were, and made it stronger. And they kind of kept wanting to go further, because at the end of the day, Zionism is a kind of maximalist strategy that they apply, and that's been pretty evident, I think, from what we've seen, how they've continued to pursue Jeremy Corbyn, continued to pursue other people, me included, academics, indeed yourself, Sean, victim of their pernicious tactics. So no, that was absolutely disastrous. But Tony, I mean, sorry, I don't know if you wanted to sort of add any more to.
Yeah, you were talking about the junta in South
Argentina,
America, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, it ruled for 7 years. Israel didn't once raise the question of anti-Semitism, the persecution of Jews. Not only that, but Jews who were defined as subversive by the junta were refused or turned away by the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires. As far as Israel was concerned, it had a profitable trade with Argentina in terms of arms. It was supplying $1 billion a year at one point, and it didn't want that jeopardized by the anti-Semitism in Argentina. So I mean, when it came to a choice between the Jews and the Jewish state, the choice was the Jewish state, and that has always been Zionism's position, because Zionism was never set up to combat anti-Semitism. Zionism started from the belief that you couldn't fight anti-Semitism. I mean, if I quote Theodor Herzl again, who was a journalist in Paris for the New Free Press, a Viennese journal, and he said, and this was in the middle of the Dreyfus affair in 1896, he said, in Paris, I achieved a freer attitude towards anti-Semitism, which I now began to understand historically and to pardon. Above all, I recognize the emptiness and futility of trying to combat anti-Semitism. So there you have it. And combat is in inverted commas. He didn't combat it at all. And nor did it want to. It didn't see it as its task. Its task was to build a Jewish state. And that's what it concentrated on. Yeah.
Of course, these days, Tony, of course, we've got the so-called new anti-Semitism, which I think we touched on earlier on in the program, which, David Baddiel is now sort of touring the TV studios and got his own little documentary. But as we know, it's about trying to stifle criticism of Israel. Although he says that he's no real interest in Israel. I don't know.
I mean, he was he subscribed to the whole theory of Corbyn being anti-Semitic and the Labour left being anti-Semitic. I mean, the man is a hypocrite and a liar. He turned up at Keir Starmer's house with a book, his book on anti-Semitism, which Starmer related to the Labour Friends of Israel. So, I mean, it's quite clear what his agenda is. I mean, he's a racist anyway. I mean, he was responsible for blackface, for ridiculing Jason Lee, and basically...
Yes, he has subsequently apologised for that now, hasn't he? But, I mean, 25 years after the event, but he has, apologised.
I'm going to have to terminate this now, because there's a problem with my child.
Oh, okay, no worries, Antonio. Well, listen, thanks very much indeed for taking the time to join us this evening. I hope that people have found Tony's contribution interesting. Apologies for the interruptions he's got, but obviously domestic arrangements sometimes do get in the way, unfortunately, of real life. But thank you anyway, everybody, for watching. Thanks, Sean. I don't know if there's any other comments that people have got that you want to share, or
no. I thought that was quite an interesting question from Lizzie about how much control do you think the lobby have over our politics in this country, and of course it wasn't just the anti-Corbyn stance. I mean, we have quite a few members of the Conservative government who are involved in the campaign against anti-Semitism, in the Conservative Friends of Israel, and all those kind of things. So, like Michael Gove is one of their board members.
Yeah. I mean, there's the Al Jazeera documentary, of course, wasn't there, in 2017, at the beginning of 2017, talked about the influence of the Israel lobby on British politics, and it didn't just focus, you're right, on the Labour Party. I mean, it certainly has significant influence in the Conservative Party, and indeed they talked about taking one of the Tory ministers down, Alan Duncan, because he was critical of the Zionist entity. I mean, that's one of his only saving graces, I think. I mean, he's a pretty right winger, but
Boris Johnson has been very heavily involved in the state of Israel. I have pictures with him stood with Chabad Lubavitch rabbis in front of a big sign that says Chabad Lubavitch all over it, and at the Wailing Wall, and photographed with the IDF soldiers, and George Osborne as well. He was photographed with the IDF soldiers. So they all seem to sort of go over there and pay homage, don't they, to the great state of Israel.
That way. And BICOM, the British Israel communications outfit in this country, kind of pro-Israel lobbying body, and then AIPAC in the United States. These are very influential lobbies, and they do everything in their power to squash any criticism of Israel and holding Israel to account. I mean, so we're obviously taking on very, very powerful vested interests here, but I think it's important that we do speak up for justice and speak up for the Palestinian people, and speak up against hostile foreign states having too much influence over the democracy in this country. But anyway, we'll probably call it a night there. We're ending slightly ahead of schedule. As I say, Tony's domestic situation got in the way there, unfortunately. But hopefully people will buy the book that Tony's written. It will be a fascinating insight. If anybody's read his blogs on a regular basis, he's a sort of got an encyclopedic knowledge, and always very well researched. So I think it will be a useful historical tome that hopefully will help to improve and inform the debate, which has been pretty one-sided hitherto. And hopefully Tony's work can help to level up the playing field a bit, and get some historical perspective into the reality of Zionism. But thank you anyway. Thank everybody for watching. Thanks, Sean, for moderating today. And we'll be back next week, hopefully at the same time, same place, 7 o'clock. So see you then, and good night.
Bye, everyone.